Welcome to the Michele Tafoya podcast, brought to you by Genucel. So there's gender and there's sex, and I think they're different, and I think most people agree. Sex is biological. You're male or you're female. Those are the two words that we've assigned to sex, male and female, chromosomally different. In gender, we also talk about women versus men, girls, boys, male, female, but gender has become a much more fluid thing these days, as we all know. But sex, is it non-binary? Are there more than two choices? Our next guest doesn't think so. I think you'll love listening to him. That's coming up.
Welcome to the Michele Tafoya podcast.
I was sent an editorial from the Wall Street Journal some time back, and the title is A Biologist Explains Why Sex is Binary. In an effort to confuse the issue, gender ideologues cite rare, ambiguous intersex cases. We're going to get into this. This topic seems to be not going anywhere for a while. So I like getting different points of view on this. And Colin Wright, who has written a lot on this topic and is a biologist, will join us. Here's some expert advice from someone else. Do you see dark spots when you look in the mirror, ladies? Because they're not going to go away on their own. Introducing the dark spot corrector from Genucel right in time for summer. The dark spot corrector, with not one but 3 cutting-edge ingredients, goes to work fast to target sunspots, dark spots, liver spots, and even old discoloration, both on your face and hands. You will be amazed at how quickly you're going to see results with this. You can now enjoy your summer sun, your beach, your barbecues, anything outdoors without embarrassing spots. With Genucel, you'll see results or your money back, and there are no questions asked. So go to Genucel.com right now. Get your dark spot corrector with the new Genucel Most Popular package, now featuring summer essentials like the best-selling Ultra Retinol Moisturizer, which I love, with a powerful retinol alternative that's safe to use in the summer sun. Visit Genucel.com/Michele with 1L, Michele, right now for these amazing summer essentials and save over 70% off Genucel's most popular package. Don't wait. Order Genucel's most popular package now. Free shipping, free returns, and the best luxury skincare you're ever going to use, all at 70% off. Genucel.com/Michele, Genucel.com/Michele with 1L, Genucel.com/Michele. I think I've spelled it every way that I can. Get there now. Up next, a biologist on why sex is binary. Welcome, Colin Wright. I first discovered you in a Wall Street Journal piece on why sex is binary, and have since then found you a great follow on Twitter. You have really delved into this issue of binary versus this ideology of non-binary sex. Why has this become one of your focal points?
That's a really good question, because if you asked me this, 5-6 years ago, I couldn't have imagined that this would be the thing that I'm harping on and on about online. And is, a large part of my career actually now is elucidating these points of biology. It really just started when I was in academia. I was an academic scientist, a postdoc at Penn State. And I just saw a lot of my colleagues that were making weird claims about sex being a spectrum. Maybe there's 5 sexes. Certainly more than 2, that's something was very problematic with this idea that there was only 2. And I just, from my biological background, I knew what biological sex was. I knew why there was only 2. And I just saw these simple errors that they were making in their arguments. And I decided just to push back, just not about the whole gender ideology thing. This was purely just like, I'm just going to clarify something about biology for my colleagues because there's some confusion here. And when I pushed back, I was expecting to get, if they disagreed, they would come at me with more evidence and we could have a reasonable, friendly discussion about it. That's why I was an academic scientist. But I just instead was met with all these crazy accusations that I'm a bigot, racist, transphobe, all this stuff. And that was just really shocking to me because the reason I wanted to be a scientist is so I could talk say true things about biology, and I thought academia was supposed to be this area where those types of discussions could be taking place. Turns out that wasn't the case, and there was major cancellation attempts around me to varying degrees of success and just trying to destroy my reputation. So needless to say, I just sort of decided to double down on this. And I didn't want to just kind of go away and stop talking about it because it was inconvenient. I was kind of early to the conversation, and people liked the way I talked about it, and they thought it was clear. So I just decided to keep doing it. And lo and behold, it's turned into one of the biggest topics, I guess, in the culture wars now. And I just sort of keep on doing it now. And I'm sort of a go-to person on this issue now.
Yes, you are.
Right.
And I appreciate that you've continued on with it. Again, these cancellation attempts and this, as you describe it, this academic environment in which we cannot have civil debate about something scientific. And if you go against this side of it, you are called names to shut you up, but you didn't. And I'm so glad you didn't. You've written for Wall Street Journal, as I've said. You have a Substack. You're on Twitter, and I want people to know your Twitter address. It's at Swipe Right, WRIGHT, because it's a tremendous follow. How are people justifying this idea? Again, if there's gender and there's sex, and those are two different things, right? How would you differentiate those two concepts?
Yeah, well, I mean, they used to be two different things, right? There was a sense in which we used those words interchangeably in the past. And then I think I remember, right around sometime after 2010, there was this idea in left-wing circles, this is kind of where I came from, that no, we need to really split these things into two different categories. Sex refers to your biology, it's immutable, you're born with it, and your gender has to do with sort of what you identify as. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people, myself included, were kind of on board with this. I was okay with it as long as we had that wall between how you're identifying and your biology, and then that quickly, I think that period lasted all for about 2 seconds before they've just really started conflating gender and sex completely. Now they're not saying they identify as like a man or a woman, which they call gender terms. Now they're saying they identify as the opposite sex. And then they're making these crazy claims about, sex being a spectrum and more than two sexes. And just when you think that, they're talking about two separate things, well, you look at the policy prescriptions, you look at what's going on in the real world, and it's clearly just a muddling of the biology of sex completely. This is why we have males entering female spaces, playing in female sports. This wouldn't be the case if it was just like, oh, sex and gender are different, and I just want to identify as something. This is clearly just like a major reality denial in like the strongest sense possible.
It's amazing to me that a major reality denial is coming in the world of science. I thought we were supposed to, trust the science and all of this, but in this case, it doesn't seem as though even some of your colleagues, scientists, are going along with this. What is their evidence that there are more than two sexes? I mean, you're either XX or XY. That's what I learned in biology. Has something changed?
No, I mean, they don't have evidence per se. They have just really bad arguments that are based on a complete misconception of what it means to be male or female. So fundamentally, when we talk about males and females, we're talking about two different evolved reproductive strategies in nature. And these strategies, one of them is to produce many small gametes or sex cells, or what we call sperm, or a few sessile, means stationary, larger gametes that we call eggs or ova. Those are the two sex strategies that are out there. There is not a third strategy. You can have certain species that might utilize both strategies in one body. We call these simultaneous hermaphrodites. But they're still just using both sexes in one body. They're not a third sex. And humans, we don't even have true simultaneous hermaphrodites. So really, there's only two sexes that a person could potentially be. And the way humans have evolved is we have one sex per body. Individuals aren't born with both. There's never been an instance of a person that's, both fertile as a female and is able to produce sperm as well.
So then a hermaphrodite that you mentioned, there's no true like dual purpose hermaphrodite. I'm saying it in my own words, trying to recall what you said. So what is, if we have a hermaphrodite in the human you know, among us in the species of man, or our human species, not animals. What does that look like? What do they have one or the other ability to produce one or the other gamete?
Yeah, so there's no example of a true hermaphrodite in humans. In the medical literature, sometimes they'll mention true hermaphrodites in humans, but what they really mean is an individual who has both like testicular and ovarian tissue. But either one or the other is active. There's never been an instance of an individual who's fully functional as both a male and a female. It's usually one or the other, or neither, never both. So that's one major aspect of it, just this misconception of what it means to be male or female. And then what they think means male or female are sort of the downstream sex-related characteristics that males and females have that do largely overlap. We call these secondary sex characteristics. It's the characteristics that differentiate males and females after puberty. So women go through puberty, they grow breasts, the way the fat is distributed over their bodies, their voice doesn't drop. Males get taller, muscle mass on the upper body, tend to be more lean, square jaws, deeper voices. These are what we call secondary sex characteristics. And, you can have women with very deep voices and men with very high-pitched voices. So in a way, those traits sort of overlap and are kind of on a spectrum to some degree. But those don't make you male or female. Those are maybe the social signals that we get from people that we maybe socially think of as when we're dealing with males or females. But fundamentally, a male with breasts who has a high-pitched voice and no facial hair, like they're just as much of a male as, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson or something who's just super masculine. So there's differences in masculinity and femininity, or whether different traits are masculinized or feminized to certain degrees. But again, this has no bearing on whether you're male or female, which is ultimately rooted in the types of gonads you have in the gametes that they would normally produce.
So when we hear these chants of trans women are real women, I mean, it's just false, unless they're, again, twisting language to use it for their purposes. But trans women are not biological women, right?
Yeah, I mean, you hit it on the head. They're manipulating language. In their minds, a woman is someone who conforms to the stereotypes that we commonly associate with females. So, I would have viewed this in the past, and still do, as this is a very sexist assumption. This is, you're only a woman as if you perform, traditionally feminine female roles. And you're only considered a man or a boy if you're traditionally masculine in all these different ways. And that's sort of like the initial payment that you have to do to gain access to manhood and womanhood. There was a really good meme that I saw that kind of distilled what this gender ideology says and how it views men and women. The first, so it was like three different statements. The first one was sexism, and it said something like, sexism is women must do the dishes. And then the next one was equality, and it said both men and women can do the dishes. And then gender ideology says that whoever's doing the dishes is the woman, regardless as if you're a male or female. So that's, I think, it's a funny meme, but I really do think it hits it right on the head with how they're identifying males and females, or men and women, based solely on the stereotype you happen to conform to. So that's the language manipulation. So in their mind, trans women are women because if a woman is anyone who identifies as a woman, which is those stereotypes that we associate with females in their whole belief system.
Well, and this gender ideology is now including this incredible spectrum. I mean, we're not just talking about, identifying a few or five ways. We're talking about protecting minor attracted persons. We're talking about trans men and trans women. And this notion that men can menstruate. Well, no, I mean, you can identify as a man, but you're still a woman, and that's why you menstruate. Sorry to make people uncomfortable. I know that's a touchy issue. But now we've got biological women who are transitioning to become men who also want to get pregnant. This is a really interesting issue, because if you are transitioning and you are legitimately transitioning through drugs, through some sort of medicinal manipulation, is it really safe to get pregnant?
It is not safe to remain on high levels of testosterone while you're going through pregnancy. So you're referring to a recent paper that was, I published a response to a crazy academic paper on my Substack, and this paper was arguing that some trans men, who are biologically female, they would like to become pregnant and have offspring. But they're usually advised under, good reason to go off testosterone during their pregnancy. One, because it makes it difficult. There's higher rates of miscarriage, but most importantly is because it can have these androgenizing effects on your fetus. So you have a female offspring. It can have, they can have enlarged genitals because they're exposed to high levels of testosterone. This is sort of the androgenizing effect on a fetus. And this paper basically said that, our precautionary methods are too focused on, having healthy babies. And, we basically need to just get over this idea that we need to have, or that we should desire offspring that have normal or ideal body parts, that fall outside of the so-called sex binary. And so we should not tell trans men, who are female again, to go off their testosterone, because, that's help validating their identity as a man through society. And it's just, I think it's just a complete abandonment of medical ethics. You're placing just your own, desires over the desires and health of the fetus. And it's just this sort of moral relativism that is now just sort of taken over medical ethics and is resulting in, harm and medical malpractice, basically.
I want to get to the medical part of this, because it seems, again, doctors are scientists. And it seems to me that a lot of do no harm is being thrown out the window when you talk about gender affirming care and removing a young person's breasts, or trying to they have the lower surgery, the upper surgery, all of these things, and just the hormone blockers and the puberty blockers. Again, Colin Wright, I told you, swipe right on Twitter, and at Real Last Stand as well. Real Last Stand is his Substack, and it's a great read with the Manhattan Institute. Colin, why are doctors doing this?
That's that's a good question. I didn't even know about the whole medicalization complex about children and gender nonconforming youth when I first started talking about the sex denialism. I wanted to push back against this, the pseudoscience around sex, because I thought it could have these crazy spin-offs. If you're denying a fundamental aspect of biology, then bad things can emerge. And this whole idea of gender affirming care is one of them. It's primarily based on pseudoscience. It's based on this notion that, sex is a spectrum, and that it's mutable, and that your traits can be modified through surgeries to literally move you along that sex spectrum and change your sex, or at least make you go to more one side or the other. And then it's also based on this idea that everybody has this innate gender identity that they can know about themselves from a very young age, sometimes as old as 3 years old. And this never changes throughout their life, except if you're gender fluid, then that's your gender identity, and it can change. Your gender can change, but your gender fluid identity is what's permanent. And that this is a condition everyone has. And that if your gender identity doesn't match sort of the biological traits that you have in terms of sex, then you have this incongruence there. But don't fret, because surgery, again, can change your sex so that it aligns with your gender identity. You can make your body more masculine or feminine to align with how you feel on the inside. Now, this is just completely insane. It's not based in reality. What we have in reality is that both males and females vary greatly in their degree of how masculine or feminine they are in terms of their personalities and their interests and their desires and what have you, how they socialize. But that's just a plain fact about males and females. There's nothing inherently mismatched from a girl who is very masculine or a boy who's very feminine. This is just natural variation we see in humans. This idea that there's this mismatch and that it needs to be corrected, that is both, pseudoscience and just an invasive procedure, life altering, body altering, that is I can't imagine how the scientific establishment has embraced this. But it largely has, just because they've been captured by this ideology, this whole inclusive, trans thing that nobody wants to push back. There are people who are upset about it, who are wanting to push back, but they get silenced. They get called transphobes. They get, you're far right, blah, blah, blah. It's a crazy thing that's going on, because you can see this medical scandal like unfolding before our eyes. But since the institutions that are responsible for this and who are supposed to be the ones that are doing the checks and balances, they're captured too, or at least they're the ones who are supposed to speak up are remaining silent. So this is where we are now.
Yeah, this is where we are. And those, as you said, with a spine are going to get called every name in the book. And I admire anyone who, in spite of being called those names, continues to stand firm on this, because it, again, we're supposed to follow the science. I enjoyed this column so much that I want to read a little bit of it to the listeners, and so that you can comment. The transgender movement has left many intelligent Americans confused about sex. Asked to define the word woman during her Supreme Court confirmation hearings last year, Ketanji Brown Jackson demurred, saying, "I'm not a biologist." Well, I am a biologist, and I'm here to help you, right? Are sex categories in humans empirically real, immutable, and binary? Or are they mere, quote, social constructs? The question has public policy implications related to sex-based legal protections in medicine, including whether males should be allowed in female sports, prisons, and other spaces that have historically been segregated by sex for reasons of fairness and safety. And yet, here we are, and it's 2023, and it seems like this movement thinks in order to move forward and be progressive, we have to turn stuff on its ear, like Title IX, which was implemented to keep sports fair, to allow women the same opportunities to compete as men, are now allowing biological men to compete against women, which, as we've seen, is completely unfair. How does this ship get righted, Colin? And I guess there are people who are going to think that you and I are the, MAGA right-wing extremists who think that this is wrong. But it's a very strange time when someone like Dylan Mulvaney can simply dress up like a Barbie doll and say, "Look at me, I'm a woman. And by the way, let's embrace the bulge. I do have a bulge, but hey, some women have bulges." I mean, if it weren't happening, I would say, this is just such a freaking crazy notion. And I try to be accepting of, and I do accept, if they want to live that way, I don't care. But when it affects fairness and people's health and medical ethics, that's when I become concerned.
Yeah, we just need to start trying to put up these safeguards in place in the law, really, because at this current moment, we cannot count on the medical institutions to go ahead and put up these safeguards themselves. We're seeing this disparity between the U.S. and much of the other of the world, particularly in Europe. They have performed these systematic reviews of the evidence in Denmark, in the UK, and Sweden. And they have, which is the highest type of study you can do that assesses not just how much evidence out there is, but it looks at the strength of each study, and it looks at how strong or weak the evidence is. And then it sort of is able to sum them up and give you an idea of the evidence for the benefits of these things like gender affirming care, which is, I would call, child sex change procedures is what they literally are.
Yeah.
Every country that has done these studies has found that there is just no good evidence suggesting that there's beneficial outcomes, and just a million red flags that say that are highlighted for potential risks, given how invasive and permanent these types of changes are to the body. We're talking permanent lifetime infertility, completely destroying your endocrine system, lifelong medical dependence on using exogenous hormones to supplement your thrashed endocrine system. The U.S. medical bodies have not performed these systematic reviews, and they've shut down any debate of trying to have these things come about. Yet they still just harp on and say that this is life-saving, gender-affirming care. So we can't count on the medical institutions to sort of right the ship on themselves. So right now, a lot of states are putting up these safeguards, or they're performing systematic reviews of the evidence themselves, like was done in Florida. This is kind of what we need to do right now to make a stopgap, because it's gotten this way because they didn't put anything up to a vote. They just sort of changed the language. We're able to change laws by changing the way that certain words were interpreted. And then through a sort of a campaign of intimidation, of keeping people silent on these issues. So speaking up, but also going at this, I don't like to pull levers of politics, but if this is a way that we can actually put in some stopgaps to just slow everything down or grind it to a halt until there's those systematic reviews that are performed, which if they're anything like all the other ones that have been performed, they're going to show that the risks are just far outweigh any purported benefits to this stuff.
I really resent doctors who say to a parent, well, do you want a living daughter or a dead son? As their response to a child who is going through gender dysphoria. There is Caitlyn Jenner on the one hand, who took all of this on throughout her whole life and made these decisions on her own as an adult. And then there are children, minors, and who don't have fully developed brains, if I'm correct, right, Colin? Your brain, when does the brain fully develop? 22, 23?
I think it's around 25 is when your prefrontal cortex is considered fully mature. But there's other ways. Your body kind of changes throughout its entire life. So
yeah,
but yeah, it's mostly solidified, I think, by 25.
Okay, so we're allowing children to dictate whether or not they have life-changing surgeries before their brains are fully developed, before they sometimes at peak emotional heightenings in their life, during puberty or whatever, when you're all over the place. It is, it's nuts. And I want to help these kids as much as anyone, but I don't think a knife and a surgery is the way to do it. I think we got to start with a lot of counseling and talk therapy, and maybe wait until their brains are fully developed to let them make those decisions. At least, again, if they want to live a certain way, it's a free country. But children, I think, are being really, I don't know that their needs are really being met here. I can't, as you mentioned, it doesn't seem to be a lot of positive outcomes. We have people who regret having had those medical transitions. And it's just, I sometimes, Colin, I can't believe we're having these conversations. And I think to myself, God, does that make me just really out of touch? Or what do you sense in your writing, your tweeting, your appearances, your public, all that you do? Do you tend to get more pushback or more support?
So that has flipped over time, which is in a kind of an interesting way too, because when I was in academia as an untenured postdoc, I got swarmed by activists daily who would reach out to my university trying to call jobs I was applying to and posting on job boards that I was a transphobe white supremacist, et cetera, because they knew that I was extremely vulnerable. I wasn't tenured. I'm still looking for jobs. I'm on the academic job market. And there was just a concerted push to ensure that I never got hired anywhere in academia because I'd be a threat to, trans and non-binary students or whatever. Once I left academia and the stuff I do now, even though I have a much larger audience, it's almost all support. They don't even try to come after me anymore because I've sort of made myself uncancelable. So they know that they can yell and scream all they want, but it won't have any effect. So that's good for me, but it really shows that they're just, the way they try to go about it, the way they choose their targets is based on, can they get this person to shut up?
Yes.
Based on, going after the things that they need to make a living, to pay rent and that type of stuff. So that's been an interesting evolution. And I just want to reiterate things that you said too, about how, for me, all of this is really, when I started standing up and talking about it was primarily because of what's happening in children. I have adults who identify as trans. They don't, truly believe that they were born in the wrong body. They just have this strong inner sense that, they didn't feel comfortable in the way that their bodies looked before. And so it makes them feel better to sort of portray themselves and transition their body to appear as the opposite sex. And, I'm totally fine with that. If you're an adult, you're well-informed, you're not, haven't bought into a delusional ideology, which is what we have now. So before, it was just seen as a medical condition where, you weren't literally the opposite sex, but you just took steps to appear to ameliorate your dysphoria. Now we're telling people that, you really are born in the wrong body. You're a girl in a boy's body or vice versa. And this is what we're telling children. And, we're creating this dysphoria that wouldn't have otherwise been there for people who are tomboys. Because if you look at the definition of what transgender means by the CDC and the Endocrine Society and the American Psychiatric Association, being trans is literally synonymous with just gender nonconformity. It's whether your identity, expression, or behavior it doesn't align with they would say sex assigned at birth, but what your sex is. We would just call this gender nonconformity before. We'd call these people tomboys if you're a girl, or a femboy or something if you're a man who's sort of more feminine. And so normally kids would just be like, oh, I'm just sort of gender nonconforming. But now we're telling them, no, you have a mismatch between your sex and your gender identity. Oh, what does that mean? Oh, you're confused. Let's take you to the gender clinic. Well, you go there, you're still confused. Well, maybe puberty blockers are a good thing to do right now so you can have time to deal with your confusion. It's just this conveyor belt that just is putting kids down on the path to this invasive medicalization process. That's what I'm upset about. Adults also need to have proper, health care, so they shouldn't also be deluded by this ideology, because they could be transitioning for the wrong reasons rather than just, I have dysphoria and it makes me feel better, like the older generation of quote unquote trans people. But as long as we can get this safeguards in place for children right now, I would count that as a major win.
He is Colin Wright. It's just been so interesting speaking to you, and I hope we can do it again, because just in the time that we've been trying to get you on the show, multiple issues have surfaced that you can talk about and talk, help us understand better. So I appreciate that. And it's been really enjoyable and really interesting. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me on. I'm happy to come on whenever.
That's awesome. This is the Michele Tafoya podcast. We'll have Colin back. In the meantime, be brave as he is in standing up to the mob that wants to cancel. There's always a mob that wants to cancel. So be brave and do good. We'll see you next time.